Welcome to the Over the Hump podcast. Your gateway to the world of the iconic Brahman breed of cattle. At BRC Ranch, our passion for Brahman cattle runs deep. Join us as we delve into the heart of this extraordinary breed, unveiling its rich history, exploring industry trends, and sharing captivating stories that define the American Brahman. BRC Ranch stands as the pinnacle of Brahman excellence in America, boasting a decade-long legacy of champions and housing the finest Brahman bulls worldwide. It's not just about cattle, it's about a legacy that reverberates across ranches and hearts. Brought to you by BRC Ranch, where the Brahman legacy thrives and stories are woven into the very fabric of ranching. This is Over the Hump. And now your hosts, Brandon Cottrell, Rachel Cottrell, and Keaton Dodd.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Over the Hump podcast. In this episode, I am chatting with Keaton and Brandon, and the topic is, how do you make improvements in your herd? And a lot of times we find that people with established herds maybe get to a point where they realize, hey, I want to do better, I want to start breeding better cattle, but they may not exactly know the pathway to get there. So in this episode, we talk about two possible different directions you could go, whether being like improving with females or improving with bulls, and how to make a plan of attack for doing this. And it's over an hour and a half long, and as always, we're rambling and talking and just having a great conversation, and I thought this was really one of our best podcasts, and I hope you like it too. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Over the Hump. I'm your host today, Rachel Cottrell, and with me is Keaton Dodd, Brandon Cottrell. Hey guys.
What's up? Hello.
I think before we get into today's topic, y'all just got back from a trip to Paraguay last week. Keaton, your first international trip. How'd you like it?
I had a blast. I think it was good that I kind of dipped my toes in Paraguay, because to me that seemed like as normal of a group of people and as similar to kind of America as you could probably have. And the cattle were fantastic. So, yeah, I had a blast, Brandon.
Yeah, Paraguay was awesome. I finally got to check off a bucket list item and was able to go up to the Chaco. And so for years and years of dealing with people from Paraguay, they're like, oh, you got to come to the Chaco. Like, this Chaco is this mythical place in my mind. But to go up there and actually experience it, the best place, the best thing I can describe it to is probably a lot like South Texas with a little bit of different flair to it. And so when you first come out of Assumption, it was pretty swampy, but there was still kind of some things of South Texas. You even had a few palm trees and stuff, but the further north you went up, it got a little more arid. There were different kind of trees than mesquite trees, but it looked very South Texas-y. We got up there to Neuland, and it was almost like going through downtown Kingsville type thing, as far as just the grasses that they had and the trees and stuff. So that's the best thing I could relate it to. But the interesting thing I thought that they have no groundwater there. So the only water that they can supply the cattle for the ranching, even their homes, is water that they collect through rainwater. They dig like big reservoirs and stuff, and then also collect rainwater, and that's how they do it. But manage that, to me, that would be a daunting task, to have to manage your water.
That'd be a level of anxiety that I don't know if I could deal with, wondering if you'd be able to drink or not.
Yeah.
But
Right.
it was a historically wet year from what they'd said when we went down there, and so there was more grass than I think I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I've never seen that much grass in my life.
So related to the show, a fun fact is that they show together. It's a combined red and gray show. And you guys made the champion female, a red Brahman female. I think she was a Maximus daughter. And we think this is the first time that a red female has won in Paraguay.
I believe so.
That's what they told us first.
I'm going to be honest.
Champion.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. It made me a little uncomfortable because, the fundamentalist in me prefers gray Brahman cattle. But y'all said she was awesome.
It made you feel uncomfortable. We were sitting out there and
a little uncomfortable as well.
knowing we had to come home to you and hear about it. But really, that, to me, I didn't think you could get around her, and I'm just glad Keaton thought the same thing. So
She was a wonderful female.
Well,
Very
I'll be
nice.
honest. If you said to me, like, oh, okay, we're going to take Margaret, your champion gray female, and the champion red female of Stewart's from Houston, and we're going to put them together in the ring and choose like a supreme overall champion Brahmin of the Houston Livestock Show, I'd be a little intimidated. I'm not sure how that would shake out because there's some really good red cattle out there.
I'm glad we don't have to.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was fun. Let's get into today's topic. This one is a topic that I'm just going to moderate, and you guys are going to give your opinion. But the topic is, how do you make improvements in your herd if you know you're not exactly where you want to be? And just to give a little background to our listeners, this idea was, I guess I came up with this topic because earlier in the year, one of my best friends in the Brahmin cattle breed got a new job as a ranch manager for an existing Brahmin ranch. They maybe had like 300 head or something. And this ranch was not doing as well as what they had been hoping in shows. And it's a ranch that's been around for a long time. So they brought my friend in to help turn it around. And so he contacted us, looking for some advice and things like that. So the first thing that he did is sent us a picture of his donors over WhatsApp. I actually printed these off for y'all. I know you've seen them. I know you guys have seen them, but he sends me like 4 pictures of what he considers his top donors. And I'm just going to flash these up to y'all. And maybe like on a scale of 1 to 10, you rate them, 1 being terrible and 10 being great.
But no. Okay, I guess we just go for it then.
Okay, like.
Let's go to 4.
4 out of 10? What do you think? Just describe this animal.
Pretty plain.
I would say she's a little bit plain. I mean, these are what his donors are. I would be interested what she was originally, the reason for her becoming a donor would be.
Right.
She just looks like a cow.
Okay. All right. How about this one? First, let's label her body condition score.
Okay. She looked, 8, 9. Looks
so
like
really fat.
Yeah. I would say it looks like she hadn't had a calf in 2 or 3 years.
Udder quality?
But I know she's had a calf because her udder looks so bad.
Oh, God. I couldn't tell if there was mud hanging under there or what that
Okay.
was.
How about this one? I wish you guys could see them, but obviously we're not going to share these pictures. But
I like that one less than the last one.
Yeah. She's
fat yet still shallow.
Yeah, she looks like she's got a more feminine look to her, but still look like she's missed several calves.
Okay. I'll change my angle. Y'all can. Okay.
Yeah, similar kind of deal.
Yeah, we're in the same boat there.
But I imagine I wonder, now just a little background information, is this a deal where they thought they had these cows that they want to make donors out of? They pull them out of production and like never let them calve again? Because that's the thing.
Probably, if I had to guess.
It looks like they're only used for embryo work and not.
That's like paunches of fat. I wish people could see it, but this is like globular fat.
Yeah,
fat.
It looks like there's some hormonal imbalance because they have not had calves in a while. So I'm guessing they probably pulled them out of production and have kept them out of production just for IVF. That would make sense on why they look like they do.
Yeah. So he had sent us these pictures, kind of excited, and the question he was asking me at that point is, who would I flush? Which of our bulls would I flush these cows to? And y'all can probably guess what my answer was. It was like, I would not flush any of those cows. Sorry, and then...
Without any background information on them, yeah.
Right. And then the second question I asked him was, when is the last time they had a natural calf? And his answer was, they don't have natural calves, they're donors.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so I was like, these are not, this is not the quality I would say you're going to be able to make improvements with, because that's what they had been breeding. This was their current donor battery that wasn't working, supposedly. So then we talked about like things to look forward to or look for in donors and what we look for. And then my friend went back out to the ranch and he gathered up every cow that they had. He ran them all through the chute. He picked out like 10 that he liked, sent us videos. And actually, when you remember getting those, they were good. There were some good ones in there. They were much better than the ones that they had been focusing on. And when he sent those, I was like, hey, we can work with this. Like, these are some cows you can work with. And so we got some, we made some semen recommendations, and, now they're kind of in the process of getting better. But it made me think there could be other people in the same exact situation. Like, say you own a batch of cows and you're like, you know where you want to be, but you're not there now. How do you go about it? So That's the background.
Yeah.
Toss it to you, Keaton.
Well, this concept, I guess, or that question you just asked, took me back to a previous podcast and a thought and a discussion that we had with John Locke when I got to interview him, and it almost was exactly the same thing. How do you make improvements and make your cattle better? He said, first and foremost, before you even start thinking about making improvements, you cannot make improvements without function and fertility at the baseline, because you have to have a base, a cow, a functional animal to breed around. And so the concept of using that kind of barren donor to make improvements within your herd, I think, is an uphill battle, or maybe even an impossible feat, because you can't make improvements without function.
It's interesting that you said that, because I also asked my friend, do you have access to the calving records or the production records of anything? And they weren't taking any. They had none. So his new boss's take on the situation is that the cattle weren't winning because they needed a better feed program. Which sometimes you do hear that, that you hear people blame it on other factors like that, And I said, well, I don't know that the feed program is the situation, So your recommendation is you got to first start with the basics.
I think so.
Is that where you
build a house with the foundation is the first step? Yeah, I think feed, udders, do they breed on time, things like that's got to be the first step.
So talk to me about what do y'all consider the must-haves in donor quality, and maybe some misconceptions about what is not donor quality.
Just like Keaton was saying, you've got to be able to hit the most basic of basic traits before you can move forward. So it's not necessarily, and it wouldn't necessarily be how that cow physically looks or how you think she should look, But one, she's got to be able to reproduce and take care of herself and rebreed and have a good udder. Otherwise, she's not really useful for anything. And then past that, you can start adding the bells and whistles. Meat and muscle past that. And you go a step further, then you start looking at style and balance and breed character. But first, you've got to climb the ladder of the traits that are most important.
You just kicked me in kind of a direction or thought. How many times have you been on a ranch tour and the calves on their donors are the puniest, worst looking calves in the entire
group?
The natural calves?
The natural calves. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's because their donor was propped up or inflated by a high nutrition ration, and they didn't actually check to make sure that she was a cow that A, would get bred, B, calve unassisted, but C, most importantly, have the nutrition in terms of milk and things like that to get that calf to the point where it's marketable. Because I think the biggest issue in a lot of this is we're selecting on cattle that are propped up nutritionally instead of what they can actually do genetically.
Okay, so this is a question for both of you, but how important do you think pedigree notoriety is in making someone a donor? Because I'm just looking at this list he sent me, and it's like a nice paper that has the picture and the pedigree under it. And like in one of these donors, that I recognize Lawford on the pedigree, but Lawford is the great grandsire.
It's way back.
So it's way back. And then on this next one, Madison is the grandsire, but even still, that's
way
one back. Yeah. This next one, I don't recognize a single animal. Two of these. Well, three of them, I don't recognize any animals. And then this other one, Union Manso, is a great grandsire. And that's an old bull, So kind of older genetics or no noteworthy genetics in the pedigree. Do y'all think that plays an role?
I think it depends on your level and how far off you are from your target. I think if you're very far off from your target, then I think pedigree probably doesn't even come in your mind, because you've got all these baseline traits you've got to get done first. I think if you're just kind of needing to tweak in small places, pedigree is important. I guess think of it.
Yeah, I think there's other boxes that needed to be checked first before you get to that one.
Yeah, I guess to put it in a way where everybody can understand where I'm coming from, I think you need a pedigree to be a donor, but having a pedigree doesn't make you a donor. That's kind of the way I see it. So
that makes sense. So just because something is a noble daughter
doesn't make her a donor.
Yeah,
but alone, I do want some pedigree in my donors, if that makes sense.
But I would like to know their criteria and when they first selected these cows to be donors. Was it just because they were the biggest, fattest cows, or was
That could be the criteria. Looking at them, that might have been the
I
criteria.
would almost think improper selection on phenotype. They were picking for a phenotype, but it was the wrong phenotype they were selecting for, probably.
like they might have went through those cows and said, "Oh, this is the biggest, fattest cow," but didn't take into consideration that she didn't have a calf in the past year, so pulling her down and she was off hormonally, so it made her have a big fat back, and she just carrying some extra conditioning, and you're like, wow, that's a big impressive cow. Because sometimes when you pull in there to somebody's ranch and you see that great big fat one that walks to you, your initial thought is, wow, that's cool, but then you're like, wait a second, that one hadn't had a calf in a while.
It gets your average person probably doesn't think to that level, but I do think a cowman that's been around a program can quickly kind of pick that up.
Well, right now, our best donor for Houston this year was 103. By no means is she our biggest cow.
No. Or the fattest.
And she's definitely not the fattest. If you drive out in the pasture, she's probably not the one you would pick as a super donor.
You wouldn't pick her out of the lineup, no. She would be in the front pasture. She's one of the cows that would be least likely to catch your eye.
Yeah, I mean, she's just probably average plus boned, average plus
So how's
muscled,
she making all those champions? Is it the bull, or is it the things that you can't see? The functional things that you can't see?
Probably a lot of the reasons that she doesn't blow everybody else away is because she's in production. She's always wet or she's pregnant. There's nothing excess about her, I guess. She just, I don't know, Brandon, what do you think?
Somebody asked me the other day, there's like, well, she's had Margaret and she's had 240, but what about her other calves? And I said, what do you mean her other calves? Well, like her other embryo calves. I said, well, that was the first flush we ever did. And they're like, no, you've had that cow for a long time. I was like, yeah, we did. For 4 years, she's just kind of flew under the radar, but she had nice calves every time. And then we ran into a spot where I was needing an extra donor, and I pulled out in the pasture and said, well, this cow has done a good job. She's raised a good calf in the last couple of years. Let me give her a try. And then, bam, first whack out of the chute, you get to Margaret and 240.
Smart? You feel super smart, right?
I feel like I should have caught it earlier, really.
Yeah, that's kind of...
And now, the last few times we've flushed her since Margaret and 240, we've made fantastic ones. We've got the 383 bull that was division champion in Houston.
There's more of them.
Those good heifers and
those
stuff.
Ones in the pasture.
She makes a great 2 or 3 out of every mating.
Let's not forget that cow did win, too. I mean, I never saw her when she was showing, but she was champion female at San Antonio. She wins her division. Houston, doesn't she? So, I mean, she was always she was a good animal.
Do you think she just never made it into the donor rotation because we had other better ones ahead of her?
International champions.
Like 21. If we're being honest, did we not select her because she was not, it sounds so snobby, but she was not an international champion, and we were selecting cows like 21 or like Sweetie who were?
At the time, maybe. But I think the other thing, she kind of had a few spots on her that we didn't necessarily like. And so that, and you kick her out to the side, and those cows that are just always pregnant and calving.
She's never fat.
That are just flying under the radar. She was back there quietly doing her job, I guess.
We're talking about misconceptions, I guess, is that pedigree makes a donor. I guess we kind of went into show ring winnings. Is that a factor that makes a donor, yes or no?
No, I don't think so.
It depends. It depends some, too. Like, if you're raising show cattle, then obviously it's going to at least be in the back of your mind. But if you're the average Seedstock producer, the average commercial cattleman, I think it's no benefit.
And like the other breeds that you're familiar with, Keaton, like the top donors of the Angus breed or top donors of the Hereford breed, were they big-time show winners?
Depends on what kind of operation. Those breeds, and unfortunately we haven't got to that point completely as a breed, but there's kind of become two diverse sects where they have completely kind of separated themselves, show cattle, production cattle, or even in like Angus, there's 5 or 6 different kind of compartments you could fall in, whether you're numbers breeder, show cattle, performance, things like that. And so, yes and no. There's like Jason Hoffman's got a lot of donors that raise herd bulls that also won Denver, but at the same time, the biggest Hereford breeder has the most dams of distinctions, Roush. They've never showed an animal in their entire history, so it just depends.
It's a shame that there are different sects like you say, like SEC, different sections, I guess, within a breed. Me personally, I don't think there should be. I think we should all be kind of heading toward the same goal, but you do have that in reality. There are people who like to focus on shows. There are people who specifically like to focus on maternal. There's people who like to specifically focus on performance. And I guess everybody, no matter where you're trying to go, if you're trying to breed show cattle, of course you're gonna tend to lean toward cattle that have traditionally performed well in the show ring, or in any of those other sections, you look for cattle that have somewhat proven themselves in that area.
If you had to say right now, I'm putting you all on the spot, who's our best donors?
In what area?
Well, of course in show ring winnings. No, but I kind of just want to go through a mental exercise here of
Okay.
Who is our best donors? Who would you consider our best donors?
Cows that get used the most, or cows that generate the most dollars, cows that make the most productive daughters? Well, I mean, I would think obviously 21.
Okay, let's just make it easy and say best show ring producing
Sweetie.
donors right now.
Sweetie and 103 are 1 and 2 right now.
Yep.
Sweetie, 103. Okay, I would argue in looking at our calves though that 75
75 would be up
is
there.
on there.
But this is her first calf.
Okay, but you just said so this was our first flush we did on 75.
Yeah.
Who was not necessarily she was not an international champion. She was like a reserve division. But her first flush is amazing, which is kind of the same trajectory as 103 was on.
Yeah, but those calves are still young. They hadn't validated themselves even in the show ring, but they haven't, and they weren't necessarily bred for the show ring either, but at the same time, they are pretty nice. But as far as, okay, since we're sticking to show ring here, show ring validation.
We can go in another direction if you want.
But, I mean, say like show ring validation, the cows that have just, say over the past 2 years, have just knocked it out of the park with all their calves have been Sweetie and 103.
And then a cow to throw in there that's been, probably had just as much notoriety, but in a different direction. Cow that's raised the natural produce at Houston, 3 consecutive years, 835 over 7, and then her probably most famous son has won the Get a Sire multiple times, right? And so, I mean, I would think that is show ring success, but in a little bit of different
way. Because 835 herself was never a big show winner.
No.
Did she? I don't even know if she even showed.
She
showed, but I don't remember too much. Okay, so 75, you intentionally held off in Flushing.
That's right.
Until you saw a couple of her calves, right? Same for 103. What about 835? That's been so long ago. Did she immediately go into donor production, or did she?
So her first flush would have been the flush that produced 160. So however old she was then,
she'd have been 4 or 5 by then at least.
I'm losing track of my memory, but 835 was the baby calf that was outside of 341, the natural calf.
Yep.
Which kind of makes it cool too, because she excels in natural production, and she herself is a natural calf.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean it does make sense, but you never really think about that.
I never really put that together either until we just
together. I thought I had a picture of her somewhere in here,
but
I guess I don't.
Maybe on the side of the reserve senior champion at Houston.
Yeah.
In 2013, so she would have been born January of 2013. And in what year was 160 born in?
2017, maybe.
Yeah, and she had already had a calf or 2 by that time.
Yeah. So that shows that there's definitely some merit in holding off to putting something into your donor pin to see what their first quality calves are.
Yeah.
I know you believe that. Not everybody else
believes
that.
I think so. But the reason I think about it is, one, embryo transfer and IVF, and I know we've talked about this before, that they're fantastic tools if wielded properly. They are just tools, the same as a gun. You can point it at a big buck and do something good, but you can point it at your neighbor and do something really bad.
Your neighbor's bull.
We've talked about it before being like the gas pedal. And it'll help you get somewhere faster. But one, you have to have made the selection and the decisions to get you pointed in the right direction. It'll get you somewhere fast, but it'll get you somewhere good fast, or it can just as easily get you somewhere bad fast. You have to know which direction you're headed before you even put your foot on the gas.
Okay, for those who can't see, I have handed each person a notepad, and I did not hand y'all a pen because as the super stockman y'all are, I know you have one in your front pocket.
I got 2.
But for fun, Carlos Guerra posed this question to me. This is a little different direction. He posed this question to me at Houston. Ideally, how many cow families do you want in your herd to mix and interbreed with? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how many core cow families do you want? So I think everybody should write down their number, and then we'll.
How many do we have, or how many do I want?
How many do you want? In an idea, if you were like, I've got my dream breeding program set up, how many cow families do I need to sustain my breeding program? I feel like this is like a game show. Isn't there a game show where you have to? Yes, the Newlywed Game, isn't it? Where you answer a question and then they each hold up like a dry erase board.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
that's not an 8. That's an infinity.
Oh.
Okay. So
I thought y'all were on the same
Keaton
page.
said 6. I said 8, and then Brandon held his up, and it looks like 8. And I thought we had just like totally validated why we're married, but he said.
No, mine's an infinity.
Infinity
I don't know
sign.
if you got a good fat cow family. I mean, how big a herd are we talking about? If you got a 10-head herd
True,
of cows,
that's true.
it's different. But
Right.
me personally,
I'm thinking
I'll take
big
as many
numbers
cows
here.
as I can get and as many productive cows as I can get. So I don't know that there's a right answer to that.
Yeah.
I think you at least need to have one good productive cow family that you can back up generation after generation of the direction that you want to head. But I don't think you can have too many.
No, you
That's
can't
true.
have too many, but I do think that you can get by, or I guess be very successful with 5.
If you're not using outside stuff, right, help me with the girl math, but it couldn't be 2. It would need to be more than 2, right? Because you would have a sire and dam. You need to be able to
Yeah, you need
sort of like
something to go back and forth with
interbreed.
and to last you a while. So you need a few.
At BRC, we have ours identified as Boom Shakalaka 98, Janessa, Sweetie. We have 805 on there, but she's not really, I wouldn't call it a cow family. I would say like an emerging cow family.
It's 775.
775, yeah.
Would be,
So that's 5.
But the thing about those different cow families, while we all try to select for the same things, each one of those cow families has their different strengths. And knowing those strengths and how you can mate them back and forth and try to hit the center of the target.
I was talking to somebody the other day. To me, I thought right now the Janessa 98 are like the solid, consistent cow families that have been kind of proven in and out. Now we've got calves that are double Janessa, double 98 over 6 or even more, both in the same pedigree.
Janessa would be like 835, 160. Captain. There's a lot.
Oh, the 230, 227s.
Yeah. And then 98 would be Noble.
Yep. And then that would bring Margaret 240, things like that into it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that was an interesting question. Okay, I'm going to kick it into another direction, to use your expression, Keaton. Okay, if you are a breeder and you know that you have, I don't want to say subpar cattle, but the quality of cattle that you don't want, that you want it to be better, do you keep trucking along with that cow herd even though you know it's not where you want to be, or do you liquidate and start fresh?
I think that there's factors that play into that decision, like how much money do you have, how much money are you willing to invest up front, how much time do you have to reach your goal. I think all of those would affect it. You could obviously make quicker change if you just scrapped what you had, went and bought 5 donor cows that are already proven to do what you want, and immediately go into producing them.
I don't know. I feel like we're missing one big key component here, and we're being awfully general, but we might need a more specific example. What direction are you wanting to go? I guess you have to have a goal in mind of where you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in a certain area and your cows are calving every year and they're breeding back and doing what they're supposed to, and you're wanting to make show cattle, maybe that's one area. Or say, I think that can be done. Because the cattle are, if they're breeding back like they're supposed to and calving and all that, obviously they are acclimated to the environment that you're operating in. And so I think that's a great place to start.
Okay,
because then you can inject the genetics that you want over time to get you in a certain direction. Now, on the flip side of that, if you're like, I want to produce good functional cattle that calve every year and do this and do that, yet the cow herd that you've got right now is poor calvers, they're not meeting those basics, you're not necessarily going to get there very quickly. And I think that's where a good culling program comes into. Set your baseline where you want to be, and if it don't work, get rid of them, move them along. But at the same time, if you have an unfertile, non-productive cow herd, you're not going to go very far very fast.
Okay, let me summarize, and then you jump in. I think you described two scenarios. Scenario one is a average visual quality but functional cow herd that someone wants to use to make show cattle. And scenario two is the opposite, show cattle that need more function. Is that fair? Two scenarios?
Yeah.
I think there's not that many functional cattle that calve every year out there in the breed, let's just be honest. There's people that probably want to go in both directions. Let's say scenario one, average phenotype but highly functional cattle. That could be your rancher who runs 300 head in South Texas and sees them once a year and weans the calves, and he wants to elevate to a show program. Or number two is a person that has a primarily show-based herd that are not calving every year and have no function, and he needs to add function. Yeah, Keaton?
No, and I was just going to say, like the second situation that Brandon broke down, you just listed, you all would have to kind of come up with the realization that you may go broke before you get where you want to be. You may cull down to 5 cows. I mean,
right.
if you're setting the standard and holding them accountable, do they got to calve 365 every year? By year 2, you may have went through 95% of those cows and lost money on every one of them.
So if you're that guy, and let's just say you invested a premium in an animal for show purposes, and now she's 5 years old and has not had a calf, do you bite the bullet and cull her?
If you're going to...
Or do you flush her, because that seems to be what most people do.
Because you paid $50,000.
Because you paid $50,000.
You got to get some money back from your investment.
I think there's a breaking point there that a non-productive cow is a non-productive cow is a non-productive cow. It's not going to get any better.
Well, and you think about it, especially if you're trying to improve your herd. We didn't come to the concept of how to make money to replenish on your investment. We're actually trying to improve our herd, and so you flush that cow, all you're doing is making more of her in your herd. So we're definitely not getting closer to our goal there.
So scenario one, average functional cattle that need to make show cattle. I think almost that's an easier one to improve, because you could throw a high profile AI sire and flush to them, and you could probably get that.
I think that's pretty easy.
Which goes back to y'all's thing of starting with the basics.
Yeah.
It's easier to improve if you have the basics. So is it a losing battle to try to improve with the cattle you have if they don't have the basics?
I think
if they don't have the basics.
It's impossible.
I think it's an impossible. Yeah, I mean, especially if you put the basics at like fertility. Mm-hmm. How are you going to make functional cattle, or how are you going to make any improvement if you can't even get a female bred?
Brahman breeders know, you want the finest herd? You have to start with the finest Brahman bull semen, and there's no finer selection than at BRC Ranch. Our champion makers are exactly that, but we know variety is essential. We also offer semen from low birth weight bulls, polled/scurred bulls, and sexed heifer semen. BRC Ranch works to release orders within 3 to 5 business days, but you can always stop by the ranch to pick up your order too. Bring the top Brahman sires to your ranch. Go online to shopbrcatraire.com.
My wheels are turning, because I'm just trying to think of animals in our own herd
now,
that have we ever been in that situation? Number 2, show cattle that need more function.
Yes, I would say so. I'll throw it out there. I'll say Sweetie. Sweetie is an elephant of a cow. She's giant. And while she does breed regularly, she's not the best milker. She's not 100% on udder quality and stuff like that. But darn it, she's going to make a show calf. But at the same time, realizing, hey, because Rachel requires me to win Houston every year, I better make this cow work, because obviously she's going to have some influence within our herd. But recognizing I don't necessarily want 1,000 heifers coming from a cow family of this cow without some kind of improvement on maybe certain maternal skills, whether it's milking ability.
In her daughters,
yes, because obviously I'm going to breed this cow because, one, maternally, she's meeting the bare minimums of our herd. Mm-hmm. but she's rocking the boat and knocking it out of the park, making show cattle. So I've got value there, but at the same time realizing if she's going to have this much influence within our herd, I better do my very best job to make up for it on the bull side. Hence, bringing in the King Garrett bull. When I was thinking about that, I was thinking, well, I've got to find what's the best way I can find this. And so, which turned out to be a more daunting task than I expected, because not as many people as you would think have the performance records backing their cattle that you can go and track down. Luckily, I made a list of breeders that I knew took care of those things. And they performance tested their cattle as far as birth weights, weaning weights, yearling weights, but also kept up with production records on their cows. And it was easily accessible on digital beef. And so I made a list of those people. And then I went through and just kind of, I tried to visit as many of them as possible and see the cattle in person, find the cattle I liked, and go back and look at their production records. And then as a starting point is what I like to do. And then just spending time on digital beef, finding cattle that were regular calvers that weaned above average calves. And that's without even looking at them. But luckily I was able to find some of those cattle that I liked visually as well as without seeing them and just off of their production records.
Ooh, it sounds like you might be breeding by the numbers.
Well,
breeding by the numbers.
It may be just a fluke, but so far it's worked.
Keaton, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would breeding by production records and whether that cow brought a calf to the pens or not, I wouldn't consider that breeding by the numbers.
No,
I would say that's just making sure the bare minimum is put in place. I don't know. I'm a former judging coach, so much of my mentality originally was focused on the great individual, and which I think is important still in seed stock production, is keeping your thumb on the great individual. But as I get in this business longer and longer, I think of things more in quantity versus an individual. And so, like, thinking back to those cow families and trying to improve, I would probably focus on the cow family that has the least amount of throwaways, at least initially. Focus on the cow family that I know if I flush this female, 90% of them are going to be quality, 90% of them are going to make productive females, probably not shoot for home runs quite as much. But like Sweetie, I think every mating now that we make with Sweetie is made with maternal and function in mind every single time. And I guess it just depends on the cow. But
that's right, because of this is poking a little fun at ourselves, but because of, like, me and Keaton's focus a little more on the production side of things, but Rachel will be like, y'all can do that, but we got to win these shows. If I'm forced to use that cow, I want to make sure we're heading in the right direction. So I try to find the bulls that complement her best, that also don't back us out of the show side of things.
And we've proven that we can all three be happy with the same animal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the end goal, is for all of us to okay, that she met our production goal. She won Houston. She ended up being an influential donor. I think we can all, there are animals that can do it all.
I love when you said to focus on the great individual, because like Margaret, she just finished a show career and I cannot wait to flush her and, or, see what she has, because she was a great individual. And I think everybody should try that. You should do that. You should most definitely pursue that. But how long do you give an individual if she doesn't make a really good one in the first flush? Do you give her one more try? Or what's the cutoff number where you're like, okay, this great individual, while great on their own, maybe didn't produce? Do you give it 3 different bulls, 5 different bulls? Do you go on forever?
I still think that's so subjective, because what do you consider great or good or something like that?
Well, I'm looking on our page of our champions, national and international champions. I just went to the bottom. 1990 national champion, Miss BA 725/3, Amber. She was amazing. She also won Houston, but I don't think she ever produced anything, to my knowledge. I know she didn't produce a good herd sire, 100. Obviously, she's good, 27. She's the mother of Noble, right?
Yep.
So I'd say she's covered it. 274 over 7, 2012 reserve national champion female. Okay, think to back when we got married. Do you remember when she was born?
Yeah.
This animal, we were like, this is the perfect animal. You know, it was like her mother was 797 and her sire was 380, and she was one of the best, or the first 380 calf. Remember that? We were like, this one's going to be a champion.
We've come a long way.
She did not produce anything. One animal, you know.
But that goes back to, she had a full sister. If you could think about maybe a potential full sister that she had that did turn out to be a very impactful donor, and so it's one of those deals where sometimes you just got to try them and see what happens.
You know, is there a time you cut off? Is the decision maker in cutting off a donor quality of calves, age of donor?
Profitability and marketability. Maybe?
One, I think that's why it's so important to have those donors prove themselves before you even call them a donor, or before you even try to make them a donor.
You're mad, right?
I am. I'm like,
why are you
I'm
mad?
like, we're circling up here in the sky when we need to be drilling down into something.
Well, what are you drilling down into?
I don't know. I mean, one, she's got to be a productive cow before you do anything.
His face is
I'm
red.
mad.
What's making you the most mad? The term donor, or?
Yes, we're just throwing that around, but I think she's got to earn that spot through natural production.
Okay.
And where there's so much bouncing around here in the show, and I'm like, that doesn't matter.
Okay.
Really?
Okay, so we could go in a different direction. Keaton, you have any other thoughts on this?
Well, let me
particular
just throw
segment?
this out there real quick, because outside of a few things, if you make one structurally correct and stuff like that and have some look to them, you can feed the show winning into them if you feed them correctly.
Is that easy?
I think it's easier. I think that has something to do with it than a lot. Keep them fresh. You don't get them too fat, that kind of thing. But
you said an important thing at the very beginning. You make them built right in their structure, and I would say 95% of them are enough there, so that could probably...
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a lot of it, there's just so many things.
You're saying that the show ring can be manipulated.
Oh, absolutely.
And,
but through management and stuff like that. So
I get that.
Getting anxiety here, but...
I know, let's cool it down.
I would like to say, I want to back up to something we were talking about earlier. When we were looking for those bulls that would complement Sweetie, and we went through and looked at the production records of the cattle a lot before we even went and looked at the cattle. And the cattle that we wanted to focus on in terms of production records, you know, those cattle had a certain look to them. And I think a lot of that goes back to like the Bonsma type principles. Mm-hmm. Females looking like females and wedgy, and having that good wedge look, have that super feminine look and stuff like that, but still had some fleshing ease to them and things like that. So I think, one, I think you can close, you know, you go look at that production records before you ever go do anything else. And you'll start to see a pattern in the cattle that go along with those production records on what they're going to look like.
Natural production records.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Oh, of course. Yeah.
So you're saying that, to paraphrase you, if you know you need to make improvement and you don't know exactly where to start, your suggestion is look at your production records.
Oh, yeah.
Look at your natural production records.
Record keeping is the single most important thing in a breeding program.
You're so mad. You're like fired up. You're like chill over here. No. You're the guy with like a dry erase board with a giant formula behind your back.
I think, to build on what Brandon said, and like talking about just moving everything in a positive direction, I'd say if you were going to try and make good show cattle, go pick the most attractive and most powerful calves out of the group of females that still bred every year and had a calf that weaned over a certain percentage of her body weight, whatever. So sort off the group that you say are doing a great job production-wise, and then go find the ones that have the phenotype you're looking for. Or
it's a whole lot easier to make show cattle out of production cattle than it is making production cattle out of traditionally showbred cattle. If production and fertility were never selected on beforehand.
I wish we didn't have to have two titles. I wish it was all the same, but
I feel like in our program we're getting there.
That's what we're trying to do.
And as far as covering all the bases. And that's kind of where I want to be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, different question for y'all. Is it better to buy one high-powered donor or 10 replacements?
10 replacements. If it costs you the same money. I mean, especially just from a financial standpoint, right? So you get 10 calves, out of 10 cows or one calf out of one cow, but you have the same investment in both of them. So what happens if that donor cow, and this is very subjective and you could answer it either way, I think, but at least at the baseline, even if neither one of them worked out, at least you've got 10 calves to haul the sale barn at the end of the day.
Yeah, I just wrote down 2 words: cash flow.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, we all like the thought of having all these ET babies, but you've got to have a balance sheet and make sure that you're profitable at the baseline, I guess. I would assume you'd agree with us, Brandon?
If you have the one right donor cow, but how many folks would have the opportunity to, outside of Troy Thibodeau, to have the one right donor cow?
You're referring to 8 over 9.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm saying that in a positive way. Because that cow...
You're saying that very respectfully.
Yes, that cow knocks it out of the park every time, but how many people stumble up on that opportunity to get that kind of cow? It doesn't happen every day.
Well, it kind of happened to us with 382.
She did a good job.
In 21.
She did a good job.
Gave us a foundation. In our own herd, when we add outside animals, if we look at that same question, do we buy one high-powered donor or 10 replacements? We have opted for the replacement.
We've done both, but the one that's been most successful is buying the groups.
But when have you ever bought a donor, really, Brandon?
It's been.
I guess a Hudgens cow here, like 449, maybe. But did she come in a group?
No, she came in a group.
So
she came on the Southern deal.
It's been a while.
We bought the flush on the Salinas cow,
yeah.
And so I would say buying a flush is similar to buying one donor. Investing in a flush is maybe a same way you could approach it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But really, besides that, we have not really bought any outside high power individuals.
When we started this conversation about improving, donor was never in that question. And so we automatically just kind of went in that conversation and started to assume that we're going to be flushing a bunch of cows. But who's to say that you couldn't go about it from the standpoint of, I want 25 to 30 daughters that are bred very similarly, and I can go buy a $15,000 herd bull that does all these things that I want.
Oh, yeah.
And move that way without ever even having an ET program. So I think the topic of how to improve, we automatically go into flushing cows, but I don't think that ever has to come into your mind.
I don't think that's...
And
that's why you're the director of genetics.
Well, and you may end up building a more solid set of cattle by going and proving them up through natural production. Actually, I almost know you would.
Okay, so y'all are smart. Yeah, so I think we've covered the topic of donors and flushing. That's one way to make improvement. A second is to buy a better bull.
Yeah.
Or invest in synchronize all your cows and AI to a really good AI bull like 230.
Yeah,
something like that.
I know some big Angus operations where they may only use 3 bulls all year. That's it.
Option 1 to make improvements is add ET or add IVF. Option 2 is invest in a better bull or bring in AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we've known this for 45, 50 years.
Honestly, a new breeder may not think of that option because just like us, we immediately went to flushing is the first way to make quick improvement. But buying a better bull, even if it's a cleanup bull.
No matter what, if you want to make improvement, you got to find out where you are.
Yeah.
So you've got to have some kind of idea of how your cattle perform. Whether good or bad, you got to know where you're starting from.
Where your strengths and weaknesses
That's right. And just, we've said it before. Find out where you are. Set a benchmark of where you are. Figure out what your goals are that you want your goals to be. And then you have to make a plan to get there and pick a path that would get you there. But that's why if you're not going to have the discipline to keep up with all your records, I think you already lost the game.
Yeah, and I think we also, not exactly what Brandon said, but something that hit me too. We're in a society that wants quick turnaround, or everything's got to be fast. But maybe this is just not something that you can tackle in a short amount of time. Building the perfect cow herd, it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah,
even flushing cows.
Very fair.
But Kempfer's program, for instance, I'm fascinated with his culling process, or
yeah.
What is it?
constitutes.
Or do you know?
Yeah, Seedstock. What constitutes is going to be in Seedstock production. So if you're going to be a Brahmin in his purebred herd, you cannot fail. There is no, that cow has to bring a calf every year in the same calving season, or she's gone. No ifs, ands, or buts. That doesn't mean that she's going to the slaughterhouse. He demotes her to the F1 program. And if she fails in the F1 program, whatever, she may eventually work her way out of the system. But that has turned his cows into, I bet he has to cull way less cows than anybody else does because he culled them for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's, I mean, if you want to get there, it takes time. I think it's the biggest thing in understanding that there's going to be significant investments, but not so much financially, but more just investing your time.
Well, when we started in the red business the first time, we were, after like maybe a year or two, we were like morally defeated because we weren't getting where we needed to go. And Josephina Muscus told us in her wonderful accent to don't give up, that it takes 10 years to really get to where you want to be. And that stuck with me. We gave up the first time.
Didn't make it 10
we
years.
Did not. We made it 2. We gave up the first time, but that 10-year mark has always stuck with me, and it goes kind of to that same thing we talk about in Outliers. It takes 10,000 hours. We right now are 15 years into breeding cattle together, but you could really start seeing a big change at the 10-year mark. It just takes time.
That, I would say that's kind of when we started seeing the big change.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, we're really starting to get somewhere. It kind of pumps me up even more because you can see the fruits of your labor and be like, okay, now we can hone in on, we're going in the direction we want to. Now we focus in, honing in and multiplying the good.
So, y'all know, anybody who knows me knows I'm terrible at dates, but what year did we get married?
2010.
2010. Okay, so 10 years would be 2020. I'm trying to think back to kind of where our herd was. When did you come on board?
2020 was the first Houston.
So would you, I almost feel like we were like steadily trucking, and then we got to a point around that 2020-ish time, and now we have like exploded a lot better, a lot faster. Do you think it's like maybe you were pushing, and you got to a point where you kind of wanted to be, and then you really couldn't?
Yeah, but also the longer time has gone by, we've learned those cows so well.
Yeah.
We know what's going to work. We know what's not going to work, or at least to a higher percentage.
Mm-hmm.
And then you put more focus on the ones that are going to work, and you just weed out the other ones.
Yeah, and that's not to say that some of our donors didn't have sisters that didn't work either. It's a lot of the time that you got to put them in the game and see how they perform. I mean, how many times has the ugly sister been the best generator as far as a group of flush mates? It happens all the time. I don't know. I guess that's back to just you got to work them through the system and see who falls out.
Yeah. We're almost at an hour, but I do have 2 more things. Mm-hmm. Okay, if you feel like you have some cows that aren't working, is it better just to sell those and cull them at the auction barn? Don't sell them to another breeder, but just cull? Or is it better to put like a Hereford bull on them?
Define not working. They won't sustain pregnancy, then yeah, they probably need to go to sale barn, or do they all have?
Okay, so if you have a bunch of cows that are calving, and I ask this just because I don't know, if you have a bunch of cows that are calving every 2 years and you need to get them back on track, if you put a Hereford bull on them, is a Hereford bull going to be more likely to get them bred than a Brahmin?
No. If they're consistently doing it every 2 years, you better take advantage of these high butcher cow prices right now.
That recommendation is cull them immediately.
Yeah.
In this market, heck yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's a fair question that people ask, because you also have people who say, okay, well, I'm going to take my average quality purebred cows and I'm going to turn them into a recip. You've heard that, you know.
What were butcher cows bringing here at Wharton last week? $1.25?
Yeah,
or
too much to hold on.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
At $1.25, and you got a cow that in production weight would be 1,300. Because she hadn't had a calf in 18 months or 2 years, she's probably running 1,600 right now. So you run her through the sale barn at $1.25 right now, and you
got a $2,200 cow.
He's also the ruthless culler.
But
you tried to cull Fool's Likeness, who produced 2 Louisville champion bulls.
Give me the option again today. I'd do the same thing.
Market might be as good back.
Yeah. But But no, seriously, if you've got that cow that, yeah, she's 1,600 right now because she hadn't calved in 2 years, send her to the sale, get that money. If it makes you 2,200, reinvest that in a replacement heifer.
Yeah.
From good productive cows. And
I think we need to
get
define
someone.
what a lesser or a mid-tier cow is, because to me, a lesser or your mid-tier cows that maybe need to go out with a Hereford bull, or maybe they're a little plain, or maybe they're not just the most powerful cow in the world, but like a cow that doesn't have fertility, that's not a mid-tier cow. That's a bad cow.
Okay.
I guess
What
think is the
what is the cutoff? I mean, I just threw out 2 years, and that seems really like a crazy long number, but I do feel like there might be some people in the breed that fit into that scenario.
Yeah, for sure. What is the cutoff, Brandon? Well, I think a 380 is pushing it, like a calving interval of 390. You got to set the window what you're comfortable with as a breeder too. But
Kempfers is staying within the same calving season.
yes, and I think that's where I think we ought to be.
But you think about, like, say maybe this year she calved 390, but stayed in the same calving season. She's gonna have to work her butt off to have the next one still in that calving season.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it's kind of goes to show you how far behind as maybe as a breed we really are. Because like if in our Angus cows, we're looking at cows who calve at the early part of the calving season versus cows that calved at the late part of the calving season, and that's our culling criteria, you know?
instead of having 90 days, we want to get it to 60, much less.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Are y'all more strict on the fertility in our Angus and Hereford than you are in the Brahman? Do you give the Brahmans a little bit of a pass?
I think we have in the past, but I don't want to be there.
I don't know that that's right.
And that's probably why the Herefords and Angus have less problems with it.
But like in that situation, we put a huge capital outlay out to purchase those Angus and Hereford, and we have to make money on
The crazy thing about that is, yes, before we got into the Herefords and Angus, I knew we had a lot of improvement to make.
In the Brahman.
In Brahman breeders general.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought we had made some serious improvement within our program. And realistically, we have made some serious improvement. But in relation to everything else, when we got those Herefords and Angus, man, you can just throw semen in their general direction and they get pregnant. You know? I think that first AI we did on those Hereford and Angus cows that we did, I think we got out of the 10 pregnant.
Yeah, I think so.
And backed them up 30 days. And it was kind of cool. So that's why I've been working so heavily within our own program of trying to back those cows up to find out who can do it. When Kyle Perez was here the other day, we were riding through those front pasture cows, and I said, well, this cow's this way, and she's bred to back up 30 days this coming year. This cow's bred up to back up 15 days this coming year, and all this kind of stuff. And he finally stopped me and asked me, he's like, you're trying to back them up? And he said, we normally just try to keep them calving at the same time in the same season. I said, yes, I understand what you're saying, and that's the ultimate goal. But by breeding those cattle and trying to back them up, I'm trying to identify the cattle that can. I try to find the cattle that can and build off of those.
When you say back them up, explain quickly what that means for someone who may not know that term.
Okay, so a cow that calves October the 10th, next year when she gets ready to calve, she'll calve September 29th.
Just tightening up her calving
interval, shortening the calving interval.
Yeah, because they're not going to back up with a real breeding season. Obviously, you turn out bulls for 90 days. They can't back up any further than the first day that bull got turned out.
Yeah, my only goal for that is just to identify the cattle that are more apt to breed back quicker.
Because we're trying to make improvement.
That's right.
Yeah. That's great.
It's not like I want to change my whole calving season or anything like that. I just want to find the cattle that can have the ability to breed back quick after calving.
Yeah, that's really deep thoughts. Keaton, you got anything else?
Not on that.
Okay.
I thought that was pretty thorough, Brandon.
Any thoughts on anything else? Because I only have one other question, and you always have deep thoughts.
No, I mean, if you start focusing less on the individual and more of the totals of your cow herd, you will see quicker improvements, I think.
Spreadsheets. Hashtag spreadsheets. Okay, so maybe my last question is, if someone's listening to this and they want to make improvement, do they hire a consultant? Is there a point where you just evaluate this yourself, or do you need to bring in like a herd consultant to help you, or invite someone to have a herd visit? And if you're thinking, hey, I need to make some changes, something has probably triggered that, whether it be like lower profitability in your operation, or do you just tackle this yourself, or is it worth bringing in a professional
You can.
or a trusted friend?
I mean, if you can do it yourself, but at the same time, it never hurts to have a mentor in some form or fashion, paid or unpaid.
Yeah.
Get you an extra set of eyes to help you, just to take away your own, personal bias on different things. Create some boundaries or lines that you're not willing to cross, and stay disciplined to that. But no matter what, the question of this whole thing is, how do you improve? One, you got to figure out what you need to improve. Two, to what extent would you like to improve, and where would you like to be? But then, how are you going to execute it? So I think those are very important. I mean, it could be something as simple as, man, I've got a really nice herd of cows, but boy, I've got some long sheath problems or long navel problems, and I'd like to fix that. One, you got to go through and identify those cattle that have the problem, find the animal that best complements them to fix it, and then work toward that. But set some parameters along the way of, this is all I'm going to accept, and if it's over that, I'm not going to, no matter what, I'm not going to accept anything worth that. But you can do that on anything. I mean, I use the example of sheath as the most basic thing. It could be feet, it could be birth weight, it could be weaning weight, it could be carcass, it could be production, whatever the case may be. Figure out evaluate your cattle and where they are with unbiased intentions, because it's easy to say, oh, my kid's the prettiest kid when she's your kid, but get somebody else to check things out.
Keaton, what do you think?
Yeah, I was writing down like 3 things that I guess past what Brandon said, but putting steps in place to improve. And I guess the 3 things that I thought of, and Brandon's hinted all around this, we had the whole time, but I think first is you have to make a plan, right? The direction, where do you want to go? The second one is you need to establish some rules and have no compromise. Like we said, Kempfer's deal. But they don't ever say, well, like, that cow, she looks pretty good. Don't you think we could give her that benefit of the doubt and try her again? Like, no, there's a hard and fast rule. They don't compromise, and they keep that rule for everybody. And then I guess to bring it all together is there has to be a tangible, measurable outcome to evaluate production at the end of the day. Whether that's how much money did that cow generate, how many pounds did she return, what was her calving interval. You can't improve if there's not measurable, tangible things that you can use to, I guess, point things in a direction.
Okay, I had a big question that I completely forgot about, because I know we were kind of wrapping up, but I think this was a big one. And I want to preface this by all of the listeners. This is going to be a touchy-feely type question. All of y'all know that I like pretty heads in cattle, right? It's not about that, but it's kind of a frou-frou type question. The question is, do you think a person's like joy in their life, passion in their life that they have for breeding and improvement, like, their overall vibe is reflected in the cattle they breed? Like, if you're a person like Brandon, who's joyful, passionate, focused, loves Brahman, loves breeding, or then you got somebody who's like grumpy, grouchy, mad all the time, hates the breed, do you think that flows down into your breeding program? Or am I just crazy?
No, I think your state of mind and your drive and passion, it doesn't matter if you're breeding cattle or throwing a football or whatever it is. If the more successful people, I would think, tend to have that extra drive and passion towards whatever goal there is.
Yeah, that's fair. What do you think?
I think that's a Jimmy Sartwell quote from one of our previous podcasts. He said the cattle follow their owners. So, I mean,
I think it's true. I mean, I would look back at our own herd, and I would say through the ups and downs of 15 years, there were times as younger breeders that we were struggling to find our place of what we wanted. I mean, would you agree? Like, you had me that wanted show, you wanted this. We hadn't quite found the exact mix. I would say there was a point maybe around 2017-ish where we were almost at a stalemate, because I wanted show cattle and you were so mad at show cattle. That was back in the days when you were breeding gray shadow and stuff like that. You had went in a complete different direction, and our cattle, I wouldn't say they were they're not as good as what we're breeding now, if that's fair. You know,
It was like,
They-
it almost feels like it would have been, there was points along the way where it felt like we were walking in through a maze with a blindfold on. You're just like bumping into stuff, you know,
Yeah,
and,
you know,
and hitting roadblocks.
or maybe there would be a point where, and this was long ago, but I remember you would be like, I am never nursing a calf again. And you would be so mad about it, it would adjust your breeding because you would be like, I refuse to use anything with this bloodline or this bloodline because, like, I'm not nursing a calf or I'm not dealing with a crazy one or stuff like that. And you get really, what's the word? Like,
Tunnel vision.
yeah, or you just get like not mad, but not willing to compromise. You just like double down on certain things.
Yeah.
And it was almost like we were breeding cattle, but we in our own personal lives were not super happy. Is that fair to say? You know, like the cattle weren't bringing us joy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
yeah.
That's
I
a
would
good
say
way to say it. The
that's
cattle
right.
we owned were not bringing us joy.
There's been days where I'm like, it's dispersal time.
A long time ago.
A long time ago. Now, I would say the direction we've had over the last couple of years, it's a lot easier to get out of bed in the morning
Yeah.
and say, I'm going to check cows.
I'm gonna
Knowing they don't necessarily need the check-in because,
But you're checking them because it makes you happy.
yes,
To check them.
yeah.
What moment of our life I would share is I'm not going to name the specific animal, but an animal that we paid a hefty premium for, maybe $30,000, and she had a terrible udder and she was fighting you, and we had to bring her to the pens to nurse her calf, and it was our whole little family, all four of us in this Ranger, and Brandon was driving, and I was standing in the back trying to fight off this cow. It actually did bring joy to our family because our kids loved it. You know, the kids were like, this is awesome. It was a Sunday afternoon and, you know, mom's about to get hooked. But we were sitting there thinking, we spent $30,000 on this cow and look at the anger she's bringing us, you know.
But guess who ain't here no more?
She's not with us anymore.
Nope.
Keaton, what do you think?
No, I think just kind of wrapping up my thoughts is before you even go about trudging in this direction of improving your cattle, I think you need to spend quite a bit of time doing some self-reflection and thinking about who you are as a person and what would ultimately make you happy during this process. And like for Brandon, what makes him happy is a productive cow that lays down, has a calf. All he's got to do is ride through, grab a birth weight, slap an ear tag in, and move on.
Yeah.
That's the ranching life that we want
Yeah.
versus having two of us to whip off the cow while he tries to get a birth weight and things like that, and eventually it just gets to
your
where it's
cow
not
should make you
enjoyable.
happy.
Yeah, exactly.
And that could be different things. What makes me happy is winning a show. What makes some people happy is they're all the baby calves swarming them and they can pet them all because they're so gentle, you know?
Yeah, and don't pass judgment.
Yeah.
Do what you like, stay in your
Exactly.
lane, and figure out who you are. And I think you'll just kind of find a lot more happiness at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Last question. Technically, should everyone always be in a state of improvement? Should every Seedstock breeder always be in a state of wanting to be improving?
I think so.
I would think so because, I mean, you hear it all the time. There hadn't been the perfect one made yet. And
You have to think about what does improving mean. Because
Yeah,
some
I mean, it
people
could
that
be-
improving may just be moving their average in a more positive direction, or making their cows even more similar. That could be. It could be reducing yearling weight and growth. Could be making your cattle more improved. I mean,
Yeah, for
But
an
yes.
established operation, it could be a 1% pregnancy rate improvement or something like
Yeah.
that, you know? It could be a small improvement. Yeah. I think it's cool to think, like, where we are now, or think where we were in 2010, where we were in 2020 at the 10-year mark, and where we're going to be in 2030. I think it's going to be way better, hopefully.
oh,
That's
I
the
would,
plan.
That's the plan,
It's gotten
yeah.
better so far.
yeah, I need to go find something else to do.
Yeah, any final wrap-up words?
I would say today we talked in a lot of generalities about improving cattle. And it could be any trait. Everything we've said today, you could almost make a blank and fill in the blank on what you want to improve, you know, but because it was so general. But one, the same formula applies to all. Figure out where your problem is. Figure out the intended goal, and then map out a plan to get there. Fill in the blank on what that particularly needs to be. And make sure that it doesn't affect your mental health over time in terms of being frustrated and not getting where you want to be. But at the same time, every improvement should be an improvement on yourself and your own, I guess, spirit.
No, to echo some of the things Brandon said, but it's kind of putting your blinders on, not worrying about what the outside world is talking about and thinking about, and just get your goal, stick to it, and keep trudging along. But I don't know, not that I think anybody needs to specifically take more of a commodity-based mindset, but you do need to think about, would you want 100 of that animal before you make that mating decision? Would you be happy if you had 100 of this mating? And I think that would help just kind of keep everything focused in the right direction.
That's a great way to think about it. Not to, again, name names, but if they were like, would you want 100 Margarets? Yes, I would want 100 Margarets.
Yes, I would want 100 Margarets.
Would you want 100 Sweeties?
It'd be a lot of work.
I don't know.
You can make a lot of directional change.
Let's back up. 100 Margarets. And I know, here's why I want 100 Margarets. Is because it has nothing to do with her showing or anything, but she bred the first time. She calved unassisted and basically surprised all of us. Calf nurse, she bred back immediately. She's going to calve 15 to 20 days earlier than she did last year. And she's maintaining herself, and she's gentle. She has good feet. You don't have to worry about that. So she's checked all the boxes for me, and that's good enough for me. I don't care what she ever won. You know,
those are the same reasons I would say I want 100 Margarets for real.
And now, she's beautiful.
I just have the ability to like compound all of that into my head, into one thing because I've been doing this so long.
There are some cows that I know that I'm like, okay, if I'm forced to have to deal with this cow, I'm going to make the future generations better and more along the lines of where I want to be.
But you say that maybe, and we need to put this into effect to know for sure, but you say maybe you wouldn't want 100 Sweeties, but would you want 100 smoke shows?
Yeah.
Up until this point, yes.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know. Yeah. She's got some steps to finish the saying, but I mean,
she's on the right path.
Yeah, exactly. So
I think if you're, like, for us, like, we really love animal breeding and we love breeding, I probably would take 100 Sweeties, because if you had 100 Sweeties and you could put, 25 by this bull, 25 by that bull, you could do some really cool progeny testing with that. You could really see some differences.
Y'all got any Tums?
But Brandon would be the one doing all the work.
That's right.
It's really easy to be like, yeah, I want 100 tigers. But Brandon's the one that's got to go throw them steaks every day.
Oh, that's great. I think the next time we all go to dinner, we should just make a list of our internal animals and rate whether we would want 100 of them or not. That would be a fun topic. That would be a fun topic.
It's not a perfect
there's some of those
end all be all, but it is a good thing to think about to gauge where you're at and where you're going.
That could be a whole podcast in itself, breeding outliers. How to breed outliers. Sweetie's an outlier. Wouldn't you say 242 is an outlier?
Yeah, and you keep them around because you know that at some point you may need that piece, that type to put you.
I'm a firm believer in breeding pieces, and sometimes an extreme can be a breeding piece, but I'm also very comfortable of shooting right down the middle. And that's probably where I like to be is right down the center of the road, and use cattle that don't necessarily get you in the ditches, because those extremes can put you in the ditch really quickly, but they can also help accelerate you to get one somewhere.
Maybe that, because we need to tie a bow on this, but maybe that's a podcast, breeding case studies of breeding extremes. Could we have an hour-long discussion on that?
I don't know if you need a case study for that, because I could do it right now with one particular mating.
Throw it out there. Go ahead.
So, like the mating that makes Big Mamu. And that particular mating, we flushed 160 back to his grandmother, 341/7, to try to, because they are of similar body types in terms of breed character, muscle and bone and stuff like that. And then because line breeding can help you concentrate some of those genetics, that cow was getting old. She did make good show cattle and things like that. I wanted to try to concentrate those genetics. And so I used that grandson of hers, who, she had good feet, he had good feet, and they had all the basics pretty well met. And I was like, so I'm not worried about necessarily multiplying something bad. In the exception of birth weight, because both of them are not like birth weight cattle. We all know 341/7 probably had the highest birth weight EPD in the entire breed. 160 is not a light birth weight bull. So I said, yes, I'm going to do this knowing that there's going to be some birth weight issues along with this. But by doing that, we flushed her. We got 4 calves. One of those being Big Mamu, which had a big birth weight for a heifer. I think she was 93 pounds. But she had giant bone, just like I was looking for. Let's say all 4 of the animals born had giant bone, just like I was looking for. They had the extra breed character to their head and ears and humps that we were looking for. They were massive growth and had all of that. But out of that mating, only one of them was basically viable in terms of being a productive animal because birth weight on Mamu was somewhat manageable. The other 3 bulls that were born had birth weights that were not manageable and had crossed the line, and we castrated them. Every one of them went to the sale barn. So that's a swing for the fence mating. You know, I think Babe Ruth had the home run lead for a long time, but he also had the most strikeouts. So, you know, he could hit it over the fence more time than anybody, but he can also trying to do it, struck out more than anybody. So I think one of those, I'd rather get a base hit every time than hit a home run once out of 10 times and strike out the other 9.
Was that the one when we had to induce some of those because we were worried about birth weight and we internally said we think we've gone too far?
Yes.
That was the one.
Well, if you think
we crossed the line.
If you use that same line breeding philosophy on a female that was much more middle of the road, do you think that you'd had maybe more than one that stayed in the program?
Probably.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and so who are you breeding 242? Knowing all that you just said, who are you breeding 242 to make it better for the next generation?
So that cow, it's so far the only thing I've mated her to. Well, like for her first natural calf, I've mated her to King Garrett, mainly because she was show barn cow and all that kind of stuff. Needed a light birth weight, but the Verano bull that we have now, the Maasai son, that particular cow might be the number one reason we bought that bull. Moderate in his frame size, low in his birth weight. I think when we were looking at that bull, even Mark said, this is the kind of bull you can sell to anybody any day of the week because he's so right down the middle.
Correct.
Yeah.
Very correct.
He's a problem-free, right down the middle kind of thing. And that's kind of where I'm bringing her back to. I've hammered in the traits that I want to. Now the traits that we need to fix. Now that's what we're chiseling on to try to.
That's like the fun part of breeding cattle. You know, we could talk for one more hour about this, but exactly. I'm like, this is a really fun conversation. To think through all that.
We could have this
and the
conversation all
planning
day.
and good job, Brandon. Great guy. You guys are so good.
I hope we've gone from being very general to hammering it down to something useful. You know, so.
And now we just got to see what those calves are. Constant improvement.
They'll be here.
You know, that's great.
If not, what's Jimmy say? Rip them out by the roots and move on.
Rip them out by the roots. Sometimes to make improvements, you got to be willing to rip them all out by the roots.
Right. Any last words, Keaton? You've had yours. All right.
Nope.
All right.
Crazy. I had fun. This was a good one.
An hour 20. That's good. All right, well, guys. As always, thanks for listening. You know, we talk a lot about improvement. You know, we get a lot of people that say they love this podcast and they listen to this podcast. We're happy to talk to you. I feel like I'm giving an invitation here, but if this podcast hits you and you're like, yeah, I need to start somewhere, and you just want to talk to a fellow Brahmin friend or Brahmin breeder, call us. We're happy to talk or text or bounce some ideas around, or better yet, come see us at BRC Ranch, and we would love to visit and get to know you better. You're welcome all the time.
Yeah, every problem you have is overcomable.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
all right. Thanks again for listening. Bye.
You've been listening to the Over the Hump podcast. Our passion is Brahmin cattle, and it runs deep. And this show is about its rich history, industry trends, and stories that define the American Brahmin. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram and Facebook at BR Contraire. See you next time on the Over the Hump podcast.